Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Indeed, the United States was at peace with that nation, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. No matter how long it may take us, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
It is January 1944. A massive fleet of U.S. warships under Admiral Chester Nimitz is moving westward toward Micronesia. The fleet, now headed to Kwajalein in the Marshalls, has as its mission the seizure of Japan's island possessions. The course of the war in the Pacific has been reversed. Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese advance had been halted. American forces, now on the offensive, fought their way through the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, neutralizing the Japanese forward base on Rabaul and forcing Japan to retract its defensive position to Micronesia. Meanwhile, Nimitz's fleet has just seized the island of Tarawa in the Gilberts after several days of bitter fighting. The fleet is advancing toward the heart of Micronesia. Island people and the Japanese defense forces assigned to protect their islands wait in anticipation of the assault to come. Micronesians had felt the effects of the war for the past 4 years.
The
war started in 1941, but before that, the Japanese began bringing in all kinds of weapons and food and supplies. In 1940, lots of Japanese soldiers were brought in and divided among the lagoon islands of Chuuk. Some were sent to seas, along with many weapons of war. We Chuukis began to get suspicious, wondering why they were bringing in so many guns.
Beginning in late 1940, small naval detachments were stationed in the islands. Within a year, the total naval force grew to about 6,000 men. Another 10,000 Japanese civilians were brought in to beef up the labor force. Conscripted labor, at first Koreans and then Japanese prisoners, had been brought in to work on the airstrips on several of the islands: Angar in Palau, Saipan, 3 fields in Chuuk, and 4 in the Marshalls. When this imported labor proved inadequate, islanders were conscripted to assist in the construction of the airfields and base facilities. These local labor forces were moved around the islands as their services were needed. Then, in late 1942, the Japanese battleships Yamato and Musashi, the pride of the Japanese Navy, were berthed in Chuuk for a year. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, in his dress whites and braid, became a familiar figure as he surveyed the fleet from the bridge of his ship. This massive military buildup was leaving its imprint on just about every aspect of life in the local community. Families were losing their young men to conscript labor and their land to the Navy to provide housing for naval personnel and civilian laborers.
They were taken as conscript laborers before the war, and then when the war started, then they start working on shore defenses and airport. You know, they were forced to do that.
But this was nothing compared with what islanders would have to endure after the arrival of Japanese garrisons in 1944. Army troops were moved into Micronesia, a division of 10,000 men to each major island group, a total of 50,000 troops in all. These units were arriving to defend islands that until then had served as advanced bases for the Japanese offensive thrust across the Pacific.
There were times my mother and aunties came home sick from the beating they endured at work. They were forced to push heavy cartloads of dirt, but even a little mistake would result in a beating.
Army troops commandeered houses and food trees to provide for the military needs. Widespread famine would soon strike the islands, with strict punishments meted out to people for infractions against military regulations.
So all the food was supposed to be for soldiers only, and they had put some kind of martial law on controlling the food distribution. Even coconut has to be given to the Japanese soldiers first.
If we were to get something from our own land, they would chase us and beat us up. They said the land was theirs, not ours.
My father-in-law told me that the Japanese, they accused him of picking breadfruit from his own breadfruit tree. So they beat him up. Start at his foot all the way up to his head, his back. They just beat him and beat him until he couldn't stand.
Japan was readying its islands for the attack it knew was to come.
Zenに変わりて踏みようつ悠々心の勇ましさ観光の声に送られて今沿いで立つ父母の国固唾は生きて帰らんと悠々心の勇ましさ
In January 1944, vast U.S. carrier forces were assigned to move into enemy-controlled waters and carry out a raid on the Marshall Islands, a strong link in Japan's outer defense ring. The Marshall Islands constituted a block in the path of the U.S. drive westward. At Kwajalein, the world's largest coral atoll, the main objectives were 3 small islands. For weeks, liberators of the 7th Air Force pounded the atolls in the eastern and central Marshall, softening up enemy strong points by strafing and bombing.
I was born during the war, and 24 hours a day, they bomb. That's why they call me Marok. Marok mean in English is dark, because I was born in the dark, no light, inside the bunker.
After softening up the islands, American assault troops stormed Kwajalein Atoll, the major Japanese base in eastern Micronesia. U.S. troops landed without much resistance, but still the battle raged on for 4 days while the defenders sniped from behind the ruins of buildings, fired from pillboxes, and threw themselves at charging American tanks. At the battle's end, only 200 of the defenders were taken alive. A week after the first assault, Kwajalein Atoll was in American hands. Prior to this, most of the Marshallese had been evacuated to other islands, where they provided for their families as best they could and said their goodbyes to their Japanese friends.
My father was involved in the evacuation of Marshallese from Jalud. He went to the Japanese radio operator, and he knew the guy so well that he went to him and he said, "Can you talk to the Japanese to surrender? Because the Americans will take care of you, take you back to Japan after everything is finished." And his response was, if I do that, my family at home will disown me. There is no honor in that. And the 2 guys held each other and cried, and my father went on to tell the Marshallese to assemble on this side of the island because they're going to bomb this side.
With the loss of Kwajalein and Eniwetok, 4 other Japanese bases in the Marshalls were neutralized as well, and so the Marshalls could be safely bypassed. Onward to the Carolines.
The U.S. now had possession of 2 key atolls in the Marshall Group. For from the Marshalls, the U.S. Air Force was in excellent position to launch attacks against the Caroline Islands in a giant island-hopping operation, which would take American fighting forces to the very doorstep of Japan itself. On Eniwetok Atoll, a strip capable of accommodating 4 squadrons of fighters was hurriedly finished. The target, the group of islands called Truk, was the most important enemy staging area between Japan and the Southwest Pacific. The legend of Truk's invincibility was about to be punctured effectively.
But en route to Chuuk, lay Kosrae and Ponape with their Japanese garrisons. From both land and sea, U.S. forces began a series of raids against the Caroline Islands, which would render them useless for military purposes. In February 1944, air attacks began on Kosrae and Ponape.
I was visiting Colonia at the time. I was paddling back from Colonia near the bridge, and there were planes fighting overhead. When the planes were shooting above me, the bullets were flying everywhere. If they had hit me, I would have been killed. I was lucky. They fell into the water like someone was throwing stones into the sea.
I remember myself climbing the trees, to watch the fight in the air, Oh, it was amazing. Really amazing, you see the plane diving down, burning down. That's how we got to know that the American plane were very strong and they have a much better gun, Because all the Japanese planes were shut down.
Ponape was also frequently bombed. As one Spanish Jesuit put it after a 2-day firebomb attack, Colonia, the capital of the island, no longer exists. But the real prize for the Allies was a heavily fortified Japanese base at Chuuk.
From Kwajalein in mid-March, 7th Air Force bombers began a series of strikes against that enemy stronghold. In a single month in early 1944, U.S. Air Force planes dropped a total of 1,813 tons of bombs on trucks.
At the crack of dawn, we were awakened by the sounds of explosions. Everyone ran outside, even me as a little kid. We were all stunned as we looked up in the sky and it turned red and sparkled with explosions. Some people realized these were bomb bursts and told us to run for cover. Then we started running to the trees and hid ourselves.
But everyone soon learned what an air raid meant.
My mother was scared of the sound of an airplane. If she heard a plane coming, she would immediately wake us up with a slap and yell, "Get out of here!" We scrambled around looking for mango trees or any kind of tree nearby so we could hide under it. We were never really sure if we would be safe or not.
One of the main targets of U.S. planes were the ships at anchor in the lagoon.
There were about 30 Japanese ships moored around the islands. More than 30 US planes started racing towards the ships, attacking them, seeing who could hit them first. I looked around and all the ships were sinking, and the ocean turned. At that moment, I was scared and shaking. I started praying to God, Lord, please have mercy. Put your hands over me so I can hide under them. I was thinking of my family at that moment, and I started crying. I was asking the Lord to take care of me, because I thought I would never see my family again.
The attacks were highly successful. In less than 4 months, once mighty truck was to become virtually useless to the enemy. The enemy's stronghold was reduced to a mere shell.
All hands. Now hear this. The objective of this task force is the Palau Islands. By occupying these islands, we will complete the sealing off of the important Jap strongholds to the east.
The amphibious force which moved northwestward through the far Pacific was to strike at the base of the Palau chain, Peleliu and Angaur. On September 15th, 1944, the assault was begun on Peleliu Island. Before the assault troops stormed ashore on Peleliu, the last pre-invasion airstrikes were made.
I was in our village, and then we went swimming, and we saw all this plane. We couldn't see the sky. So we were saying, oh, look at all this. And we were jumping. And so some are coming, and we wave, jumping. But then after we realized it seems the land is moving. But we're still enjoying because we never knew what is war. But then very soon we start to move toward the mountains because already the Americans, they were shooting everywhere.
In the Peleliu invasion, the landing craft rendezvoused before making the coordinated move toward the beaches. In the face of withering enemy fire, they pushed ahead. Casualties on the beaches were heavy.
The Japanese soldiers were well dug in, and the fighting on Peleliu continued for months. For many of the soldiers hidden away in caves, starvation was a greater threat than attacking Americans.
Yeah, they were very in bad shape. They eat snakes, they eat lizard, they eat rats. Whatever they find, they eat.
Finally, after 74 days of battle, the islands were declared secure.
In taking two key islands in the Palaus, the Stars and Stripes flew over the most westerly of the Caroline Islands after a campaign which ranked with the most bitterly fought of the war in the Pacific. The war with Japan had several memorable turning points. In the struggle for the Marianas in the summer of 1944, the enemy's leaders realized that if U.S. forces were successful at Saipan, Japan could prepare itself for eventual defeat.
This was their last line of defense. And you could have, I have a video that has, shows the arc of the Marianas and how important it is for the defense against possible attack from the east. And for us, it was the same thing. It was a classical target. We had to have those islands in order to get start bombing the mainland Japan.
Very lucky, my place has got plenty caves. So we find the small caves, like 45 people, very small, you cannot stand up. We have to sitting all the time and just do like this. And
during the day, we just keep quiet, keep silent and hiding. At night, when it's getting dark, we go out to get some sweet potato, sugar cane, water.
19 days we stay inside the cave. 19 days, but 1 week no food, no drink. Because before that, all the men can go and get the water from the spring, and I can get coconuts to drink. My brother can cook sometime, but after the big bomb down, after that my brother cannot cook anymore because the smoke can see.
Ships of the United States Fifth Fleet have brought 100,000 troops and 250,000 sailors to the Marianas. Saipan is the first target. Saipan, headquarters of Japan's Central Pacific Fleet, commanded by Admiral Nagumo, the same Nagumo who smashed Pearl Harbor.
June 11, 1 o'clock Sunday, they have the microphone, they're running on the street and say, Kushu Keho, Kushu Keho. And after that, the ship, when the ship's coming every place, and if the big light, then after that, boom, the canyon is coming.
The plane came and bombed into the cave. Hi, everybody's crying, everybody's calling their children, their husbands, because exploded. So the people are bombed into another place. So these legs, men's legs, or my skirt also must be hit by the bomb, no? So right away, we take whatever we can take, and we run away from that cave. My father gathered us together, and we pray, and each one of us drink the sayonara sign, drink, that we will meet again. We might not meet again, but at this point, we need to separate, because we never know, all of us will die here in the center of this. So you children, the big ones, the 4 big ones, go to Chacha, and we'll meet there in that cave. After that, I didn't see anybody except one.
By July 7th, U.S. forces had seized the major part of the island. Thousands of Chamorros, whose homes had been demolished, walked into the American lines at the first opportunity. Many Chamorros had been hiding in caves for more than a week with little food and water. Some were on the edge of starvation when they came into American hands.
One of the great stories that I picked up is about a Lieutenant Maury, and he fell in love with Saipan. He called all of his Chamorro friends together and said, look, folks, the Americans are not going to be bad guys if they know who you are, basically. So when you go up and hide, find a cave or a good place to hide, and take all the food and water you can, and be sure to take something from the church. A crucifix, an icon of some kind, doesn't matter what. And the Americans come to your hiding place, stick that out first, and they'll know you're not Japanese.
So when the soldier came, and my mom, I never know my mom can speak like that. My mom said, Chamorro men, Cristano men, Catholico men, pass Chamorro. And everybody followed. So one of my brothers been in Guam, and he just stuck here, and he learning 3 languages. Hello, friend, never mind, I don't know. Hello, friend, never mind, I don't know. So the Americans say, come down, come down.
By the end of August, Tinian and Guam were also taken. The U.S. used these bases to launch air raids against Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and Japan itself. The culmination came in August 1945, when a bomber lifted off from Tinian to drop the first nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, then a few days later on Nagasaki.
But you see, it's hard. It's really because nobody knows the effect of World War II on Micronesians. How many Micronesians lost their lives?
The fighting in the Pacific was over, but the effects would be felt for many years afterwards. Micronesians had endured hunger and hardship, but as one refugee said, "Never mind, we'll drink our tears."
After nearly 4 years, the enemy had surrendered. The war was over. On the U.S. battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, early on the morning of September 2nd, 1945, a few hundred U.S. servicemen witnessed the climax of 4 years of war in the Pacific.
It's my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion, peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
The formal surrender of the Japanese nation on the deck of the Missouri was followed by other dramatic surrender ceremonies.
At Chuuk, the Japanese commanding officers, General Mugikura and Admiral Chuichi Hara, boarded the USS Portland and signed the document of surrender on the quarterdeck. 4 years of war were ended in a simple ceremony that lasted not much more than an hour. A dozen other surrenders took place on different islands in Micronesia. Now the islands were officially in the hands of the U.S. Islanders, curious but wary, slowly emerged from their hiding places to find out for themselves what they might expect of their new overseers. What they found couldn't have been more Micronesian.
That was the days of plenty, you know. The Americans came in with all kinds of food.
They gave us corned beef, they gave us peanut butter, they gave us biscuit, cheese too, and butter too. But they were good kind. I don't see they sell nowadays. They are really the best kind, really good, yeah.
And they, of course, they couldn't read. So if they want to eat, what's that, corned beef? They just open all the cans and there they open a can of corned beef and they eat it.
Micronesians were feeling good again and were eager to build a good relationship with their liberators. Children would stand at attention and salute as soldiers passed by. And on many islands, the Star-Spangled Banner was sung for arriving soldiers.
Well, basically, as soon as the war was over and Japan had surrendered, the Japanese, Okinawans, and Koreans who were in Camp Sasupe were all gathered up together, and they brought some freighters down from Japan, and they sent almost all of the Koreans and Japanese and Okinawans back to their homes. There was a residue, maybe 25 or 30 people who were allowed to remain because they were married locally or had some other connection.
On Chuuk, there was still 38,000 Japanese soldiers left over from the war, twice as many as the number of Chuukese. Nearly all were shipped back to Japan by the end of 1945, but approximately 5,000 were held to do cleanup work on the islands.
But when the Japanese lost the war, there was no smooth transition. The Americans came in, and the policy that they carry out was to repatriate all the Japanese. So there were a lot of broken families. In addition to that, the Japanese were the one who run the power plants. They're the one who run the water system. They're the one who teach schools. So when they repatriate all the Japanese, it created a vacuum.
The transition from Japan to the Americans was not a very close one. Everything had to start all over again. The economy, the education, the politics, everything.
Because, you know, you have to remember, the war just ended. All of these guys have been, you know, fighting in the Pacific for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or maybe more. And they're anxious to go back home.
As such, there was no massive rebuilding effort to replace what the Japanese had built before the war. Temporary naval structures would have to do. In place of the quaint little Japanese shops and houses fronted by twin torii, military-style Quonset huts mushroomed.
They're all over the place. Several stores in Chalankanoa were Quonset huts. I've got a picture of the Marine base in Marpi, which is maybe 1,000 Quonset huts. Because after the invasion, after the islands were secured, there were 100,000 Americans in Saipan for the landing they anticipated on Japan. So Quonset huts all over the place.
There was such plenty in these years that military materiel of all sorts was turned over to the civilian population.
After the war, the Jeeps were sold by the Navy at $5 a piece because we had thousands of them on Tinian. You can see on the 4th of July, guys bring out their Jeeps and parade them. I think there's 10 or 15 of them that are still operating.
But even a $5 Jeep or a $20 Quonset hut cost money. How were Micronesians to earn a living in these early post-war years? For a time, Micronesians turned to selling handicraft and souvenirs to U.S. servicemen.
I worked for the handicraft first, my job. And I can weaving the crochet and weaving the bandana, cigarette case. I know how to make a string belt, something like that. And my older brother know the cuffing. He can cuff the man and woman. And we have one handicraft shop. So many of the military coming, officers, military, and they buy all those things.
They sold Marshallese woven baskets and cigarette cases, Pohnpeian dance paddles, Chuukese love sticks, and Yapese carved figures. But these new businesses did not last very long. The bulk of the military was shipping out, and as their presence dwindled, islanders had no market for their products.